a car that drives 620 miles on a single charge, a battery that cannot catch fire, no matter how hard you puncture it, a cell chemistry that skips lithium almost entirely and still keeps the lights on. None of this is a prototype locked away in a lab poster. It is happening right now in factories and test tracks across China, and almost none of it has been explained to the average person outside the industry. Somewhere between Guangzhou and Inner Mongolia, the battery that powers your phone, your car, and eventually your entire electrical grid is quietly being rewritten. And the country doing the rewriting is not the one most people would guess. This is not a story about a single miracle battery. It is a story about 3 separate breakthroughs happening at the same time, in the same country, reinforcing each other in a way that is starting to worry battery scientists outside of China. To understand why, you first have to understand what these researchers are actually claiming, who is backing them, and why the numbers involved are not marketing exaggeration. For more than a decade, the battery conversation has been treated like a single race with a single finish line. Whoever builds the best lithium-ion cell wins. Lithium-ion has powered nearly every phone, laptop, and electric vehicle sold for the last 20 years, and for most of that time it looked unbeatable simply because nothing else came close on performance. What's changing right now is not that lithium-ion suddenly got worse, it's that for the first time, several genuinely different chemistries are becoming good enough, cheap enough, or safe enough to matter all at once. And nearly all of that progress is concentrated inside one country's research and manufacturing base. Start with the institutions, because that is where the credibility of this story either holds up or falls apart. The lithium metal battery research comes out of a multi-institution effort tied to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, working alongside China Automotive New Energy Battery Technology Company. The solid-state work is being pushed toward mass production by a company called Greater Bay Technology, with plans to put the cells into GAC's high-end hip-tech vehicles. The sodium-ion side of the story is led by KATL, the largest battery manufacturer on the planet, alongside BYD, both of which have publicly confirmed production lines for sodium-based cells. And the fourth thread, a battery built almost entirely from iron, comes from the Institute of Metal Research under the Chinese Academy of Sciences, published in the peer-reviewed journal Advanced Energy Materials. These are not garage startups. These are the same institutions and companies that already build a meaningful share of the electric vehicles on the road today. Before going further, it helps to understand what a battery actually is, because the terminology gets thrown around a lot without anyone explaining it. Think of a battery like a water park. Ions move back and forth between 2 ends of the battery the way water gets pumped between 2 reservoirs, and every time that movement happens, energy either goes in or comes out. In a normal lithium-ion battery, the ions travel through a liquid, the electrolyte, the way water travels through open pipes and pools. That liquid is flammable. It is also, frankly, a little bit unstable, which is why a damaged lithium-ion battery can catch fire. A solid-state battery replaces that liquid with something closer to a solid block. Picture the difference between water sloshing around in a bucket and the same water frozen into an ice cube that still lets electricity pass through it. Nothing sloshes. Nothing leaks. And it is much harder to set solid ice on fire than it is to set a bucket of gasoline on fire. That single shift, from liquid to solid, is the foundation of the biggest number in this story. Standard lithium-ion battery packs top out at roughly 330 watt-hours per kilogram, according to figures compiled by the University of Washington's engineering program. The new Chinese lithium metal battery, built with a specially engineered lithium fluorine electrolyte, is reporting 700 watt-hours per kilogram, 700 against 330. That is not an incremental improvement. That is more than double. And to make that number land the way it should, picture it 2 ways at once. First, imagine a phone battery that currently gets you through 1 day suddenly getting you through 2 without being any heavier. And second, imagine an electric car that currently tops out around 300 miles on a full charge instead, covering 620. That second number is not hypothetical. It is the actual projected range researchers have attached to this exact battery, if the technology holds up outside the lab. Here is where the story stops being one company's press release and starts becoming a pattern. Lu Tianjun, general manager of China Automotive New Energy Battery Technology, described the new cell as representing a leading level of performance both domestically and globally, not just in raw energy density, but in how far the technology has moved toward real-world application. That is a significant claim from someone whose job depends on that claim eventually being tested by actual cars, actual customers, and actual competitors. But it is not the only voice making it. Researchers involved in the same release pointed out that this battery chemistry has applications reaching well beyond passenger vehicles, extending into aerospace, polar research equipment, and even embodied robotics, precisely because the combination of high energy density and improved stability matters anywhere. Weight and safety both count. Now here's the part that connects everything else in this story back together. While one arm of Chinese battery research has been chasing the highest possible energy density, a completely different arm has been chasing the opposite goal, making batteries so cheap that lithium's price volatility stops mattering at all. That is the sodium-ion story, and it runs through CATL. Sodium works on the same basic principle as lithium, shuttling ions between two electrodes, but sodium is not a rare geopolitically contested material mined in a handful of countries. It is, functionally, everywhere. KTL first announced a Saudi lithium-ion battery back in 2021, but by 2025, the company had turned that research into an actual product line, branded Naxtra, and stated it had already begun manufacturing the cells at scale. BYD followed with its own large sodium-ion production facility. In practical terms, this is no longer theoretical. Small electric vehicles are already being sold with sodium-ion packs inside them, and cities including Shenzhen have started piloting battery swap stations, built specifically around sodium cells for delivery drivers and commuters who need range more than luxury. The economics behind that push matter just as much as the chemistry. Lithium is not evenly distributed around the planet. It is concentrated in a small number of countries, which means its price can swing sharply whenever supply tightens or demand spikes, and every manufacturer building lithium-ion batteries is exposed to that swing whether they like it or not. Sodium carries no such risk. It can be extracted from ordinary salt, which means a country that builds its battery supply chain around sodium is, in effect, insulating itself from a resource bottleneck that every other lithium-dependent manufacturer on the planet still has to worry about. That is precisely why KTL and BYD, the two largest names in Chinese battery manufacturing, have been willing to invest heavily in a chemistry that, for now, still underperforms their own best lithium-ion products on paper. Let's pause and restack what has actually been established so far. A Chinese Academy of Sciences linked team has more than doubled the energy density of a standard lithium battery using a solid lithium fluorine design. CATL and BYD have simultaneously scaled a sodium-based alternative that sidesteps lithium's cost and supply problems almost entirely. And a separate all-iron flow battery out of the Institute of Metal Research has demonstrated more than 6,000 charge-discharge cycles without measurable capacity loss, which researchers estimate is the equivalent of roughly 16 years of daily use. 3 different chemistries, 3 different institutions, 3 different goals, energy density, cost, and longevity. And all 3 breakthroughs are coming out of the same country in the same 18-month window. In the next part of this, we get into why that timing is not a coincidence, and why it is putting pressure on manufacturers everywhere else. The all-iron flow battery deserves its own moment because it solves a problem most people don't even think about when they picture a battery. What happens when you need to store energy, not for a car, but for an entire electrical grid? Grid storage batteries don't need to be light. Nobody is carrying them around. What they need is to survive being charged and drained over and over for years without falling apart, and to be built from materials cheap enough to deploy at a massive scale. Iron is one of the most abundant elements on the planet's surface, which is exactly why the Institute of Metal Research team built their battery. Around it, using a water-based electrolyte that, according to the published research, simply cannot explode. 6,000 cycles without measurable decay is not a small claim. A typical home battery might be rated for a few thousand cycles before it starts losing meaningful capacity. 16 years of daily charging and draining with no measurable loss puts this closer to infrastructure than to consumer electronics, and infrastructure is exactly where China has been racing to plant its flag, not just with batteries, but with the entire renewable energy storage system that solar and wind power ultimately depend on. So here's where all 3 threads meet again. A solid-state battery chasing maximum energy density for premium vehicles, a sodium-ion battery chasing minimum cost for mass-market cars and two-wheelers, and an all-iron flow battery chasing maximum lifespan for grid-scale storage that never has to move an inch. None of these 3 technologies is competing with the other 2. They are solving 3 completely different problems for 3 completely different customers, and all 3 happen to be getting solved by teams operating inside the same national research and manufacturing ecosystem, often within months of each other. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable for anyone watching this from outside China. Greater Bay Technology, the company pushing solid-state batteries toward mass production, is not even one of China's largest battery manufacturers. According to March 2026 data compiled by the China Automotive Battery Innovation Alliance, the company held roughly 1/3 of the domestic battery market, ranking 15th among Chinese manufacturers. And yet this comparatively small player is targeting gigawatt-hour level mass production of solid-state cells by late 2026, aiming to put them directly into GAC's hip-tech vehicle line. If a company that small can move solid-state technology from prototype to commercial vehicles that quickly, it says less about that one company and more about how mature the entire Chinese battery manufacturing ecosystem has become. The infrastructure, the supply chains, the engineering talent, and the government-backed research pipeline all already exist. A breakthrough discovered in a Chinese Academy of Sciences lab does not have to wait years to find a factory willing to build it. It can move almost immediately into a company already sitting inside that ecosystem. That is the part of this story that outside observers, including battery scientists in Europe and the United States, keep returning to. It is not that any single one of these four technologies is unbeatable on its own. Sodium-ion batteries, even now, generally have lower energy density than the best lithium-ion cells. And the underlying technology is still considered less mature overall by researchers who have independently tested it. Solid-state batteries, despite the excitement, are only just reaching gigawatt scale in production, not yet the multi-gigawatt scale that would actually threaten lithium-ion's dominance across the entire market. What is unusual is not any one breakthrough. It is that China now has serious, well-funded, scientifically credible progress happening across every major alternative to standard lithium-ion chemistry at the exact same time, backed by manufacturers who already dominate global battery production. As global EV sales pushed past 20 million vehicles in 2025, representing about a quarter of every car sold worldwide, the country supplying most of the batteries underneath those cars was already hedging its bets across 4 different chemistries instead of betting everything on one. Meanwhile, the picture outside China looks noticeably different. One of the most prominent American sodium-ion battery companies, Natron, ceased operations after running into funding trouble, a casualty of tightening tax credits and reduced financial support for battery and EV industries in the United States. That is not a research failure. It is a funding and policy failure, and it stands in sharp contrast to a country simultaneously scaling 3 or 4 alternative battery chemistries with direct institutional and manufacturing backing. Analysts who track the sector point out that lithium prices themselves have started ticking upward again after years of decline, which is exactly the kind of shift that makes cheaper alternatives like sodium-ion suddenly far more commercially attractive, and China is positioned to capitalize on that shift years ahead of most competitors. Before this goes any further, it is worth being honest about what has not been proven yet, because a story this big deserves the same scrutiny as any other scientific claim. The 700 watt-hour lithium metal battery and its 620-mile range figure come from a press release tied to ongoing multi-institution research, not from an independently verified mass-produced vehicle currently on sale to consumers. That distinction matters. Laboratory performance and mass-manufactured real-world performance are not automatically the same thing, and battery chemistries that look extraordinary on a test bench have failed to survive the jump to affordable, durable consumer products. Before, solid-state battery production from Greater Bay Technology is still described as targeting gigawatt-hour level output by late 2026, meaning as of right now it remains an early-stage rollout rather than a fully proven mass-market replacement for lithium-ion. Independent researchers evaluating sodium-ion technology have been explicit that today's cells still trail the best lithium-ion products on energy density, and that meaningful cost advantages have not yet fully materialized at scale. Even though they are expected to improve as production increases, none of these 4 technologies has actually dethroned lithium-ion yet. What has changed is that, for the first time, all 4 credible challengers are being developed simultaneously by well-funded teams inside a country that already controls most of the world's battery manufacturing capacity. It's also worth being clear about what worked in the lab does not mean. It does not mean a solid-state hip tech is currently sitting in a dealership lot, ready to buy. And it does not mean every claim from a company press release survives contact with independent testing unchanged. Battery research has a long history of promising chemistries that stalled at the pilot stage because manufacturing them safely and cheaply at scale turned out to be a much harder problem than proving they worked once inside a controlled lab environment. That gap between lab success and factory floor reality is exactly where careful observers are watching most closely right now, and it is the honest reason nobody serious is calling lithium-ion dead yet. There is a broader pattern underneath all of this that goes beyond batteries themselves. China's approach here mirrors how it has handled other frontier technologies over the past decade. Rather than picking one bet and defending it, state-linked research institutions fund parallel efforts across competing approaches, then let manufacturers scale whichever version proves commercially viable first. It's a strategy that trades some efficiency for resilience. If solid-state batteries stall out because of manufacturing costs, sodium-ion is already generating revenue. If sodium-ion never closes the energy density gap with lithium, the iron flow battery is already quietly running grid storage somewhere else. No single failure sinks the whole effort, because no single technology was ever the entire bet. And that is really what this story is about when you strip away the impressive numbers and the press releases. It was never really about one battery. It is about what happens when a country stops betting on a single winning technology and instead funds every plausible successor to lithium-ion at once, through its top research institutions, its largest manufacturers, and its most ambitious startups, all working in parallel. A solid-state battery aimed at premium vehicles. A sodium-ion battery aimed at affordable mass-market cars and delivery scooters. An all-iron flow battery aimed at the electrical grid itself. 3 very different problems, 3 very different customers, and one country positioned to supply the answer to all 3, regardless of which chemistry ultimately wins. Somewhere out there, a hip-tech vehicle with a solid-state pack is currently being road tested. Somewhere else, a delivery rider in Shenzhen is swapping a sodium-ion battery at a station built specifically for that purpose. And somewhere in a lab connected to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, an iron-based grid battery is quietly completing its 6,000th charge cycle without losing a measurable trace of capacity. None of these machines look particularly dramatic from the outside. They're just batteries, sitting in cars and cabinets and test rigs, but underneath the surface, they represent a bet that the next era of energy storage will not be decided by a single miracle discovery, but by whoever can field the most credible alternatives at once. Right now, that country is China, and the question we're sitting with is not whether one of these batteries will eventually replace lithium. It's whether anywhere else in the world is even racing on all 3 fronts at the same time. Tell me in the comments which of these felt more surprising to you. The 620-mile solid-state car, or the iron battery built to last 16 years without losing power.